born in the land of riches, gold, oil, diamond bright. But our streets are stained with blood, but the youth fight for their rights. Protesting for a future, yet they're slaughtered in the night. While the leaders sit in silence, flying private jets in flight. They drive their bulletproof cars while we walk these streets. Say there's no money, but their jets fly with ease. Our children starve, but they're too blind to see. Muguland, why can't we be free? Muguland, Muguland. We're crying out for change, but they shoot us on the streets. Muguland, Muguland. We have all it takes to be great, but only corruption is great in the land. They say no money's left, but the rich keep getting fat. Their wrists shine with diamonds.
Wider. In the oil-rich region of Inogoland, a voice of resistance had been growing louder, echoing through the creeks and villages where the people lived under the shadow of the black gold. That voice belonged to Kelechi Osarowa, a poet, activist and leader of the Inogo people of the eastern part of Muguland, who had been speaking out against the environmental devastation and exploitation wrought by the oil companies in collusion with the Muguland government. His words were sharp, his resolve unbreakable, and his message was clear. The people of Inogoland would no longer be silenced. Kelechi was not just any activist. He was a man of immense intellect and a powerful orator. His words resonated not only with his people, but also with the broader Mugulander public. He documented the destruction of his homeland, the polluted rivers, the poisoned air, and the dying farmlands, all sacrificed on the altar of oil extraction. He led the movement for the survival of the Inogoland people, Mosuri NP, a group that called for justice, environmental remediation, and a fair share of the oil revenues that had been flowing out of their land for decades. The government, under the iron-fisted rule of General Basha-Basha, was quick to brand Kelechi a threat. But Kelechi, ever fearless, continued to organize peaceful protests, marches, and sit-ins. He used his pen as a sword, writing essays, letters, and speeches that laid bare the corruption and complicity of the oil companies and the government. His voice became a beacon of hope for the oppressed and a thorn in the side of the powerful. One fateful morning, the calm of Inogoland was shattered by the sounds of military trucks rolling into Kelechi's village. Soldiers swarmed his home, dragging him out in front of his family and then picking up 8 other perceived leaders of the unrest in Inogoland. His wife wept and his children cried out as their father was taken away, accused of inciting violence and murder. The charges against him and the others were fabricated, a cruel invention of the state to silence him once and for all. Kelechi and his alleged co-troublemakers were brought before a military tribunal, a kangaroo court with judges hand-picked by General Basha-Basha. The trial was a farce from the start. Witnesses were bribed, evidence was concocted, and the defense was given no chance to present its case. Throughout the trial, Kelechi maintained his dignity, refusing to be broken. He knew the verdict had been decided long before the trial began. His final words to the court were delivered with a calm and steely resolve. "I'm not afraid of the scaffold, but I'm afraid of the judgment that history will pass on those who perpetuate injustice. The Inogo struggle is just, and no lie can suppress the truth forever." On a cold morning, Kelechi and 8 of his comrades were led out of their cells. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and fear as the men were marched to a public square in the heart of Port Arcadia, the capital of Inogoland. The square was surrounded by soldiers, and a small, terrified crowd had been forced to witness what was about to unfold. The executioner, a burly man with a grim expression, prepared the nooses as the condemned men were lined up on a makeshift scaffold. Kelechi stood at the front, his eyes clear, his face calm. He knew that his death would not be the end, but rather the beginning of something much greater. He had already become a symbol of resistance, and his death would only cement his legacy. As the noose was placed around his neck, Kelechi closed his eyes and whispered a prayer for his people, for his land, and for the future. The signal was given, and the trapdoor beneath him opened. The crowd gasped as the 9 bodies dropped, hanging lifelessly from the ropes. It was over for the 8 others in moments, but inexplicably Kelechi Osarowa's rope cut after about 5 minutes on the scaffold and he fell to the ground, still breathing and mouthing incantations. The soldiers, though afraid by this time, were ordered by their commander to string him up on the scaffold one more time. Again, Osarowa would not die. He struggled on the ropes until it broke and he fell to the earth one more time. At this point, most of the Inogoland people present started singing an ancient dirge in unison, their soul-wrenching wails coming out in scary tunes that momentarily paralyzed the executioners on assignment from the maximum ruler. Finally, the commanding officer in charge of the operation, Captain Ika, had had enough of the weird spectacle and he directed the 20 soldiers present to tie Osarowa down, and they rained rounds and rounds of bullets into his body and his head at very close range until his head was a mass of blood. Finally, the great Osarowa, the pride of Inogoland, lay dead under the hail of the unforgiving bullets fired at close range into his skull by 20 soldiers wielding AK-47 guns. And so Kelechi Osarowa was martyred for daring to confront the Beast of Buja citadel, as General Basha-Basha came to be known. But the horrors of that day were not yet complete. As the body of Kelechi laid lifeless on the ground and the bodies of his comrades hung lifeless from the scaffold, General Basha-Basha, who had personally watched the execution of the Inogoland 9 on live streaming into his office in Buja citadel, ordered one final act of brutality. Soldiers were instructed to pour acid on the bodies of the executed men. The corrosive liquid hissed and steamed as it ate through flesh, ensuring that nothing but bones would remain. It was a barbaric display of power, a message to all who dared to oppose the regime. Defiance would be met with not just death, but annihilation. The crowd, already numb with fear, was horrified into silence. Even the soldiers, hardened as they were, could barely watch. The stench of burning flesh filled the air, mingling with the acrid smell of the acid. The bodies were unrecognizable by the time the soldiers were done, reduced to little more than charred remains. The news of Kelechi Osarowa's execution spread like wildfire across Muguland and the world. International outrage followed, with governments, human rights organizations, and environmental groups condemning General Basha-Basha's brutal regime. Sanctions were imposed, and Muguland was thrust into deeper isolation. But within Muguland, something else was happening. Kelechi's death sparked a fire of resistance that even the most brutal repression could not extinguish. Songs were written, poems were penned, and murals were painted in his honor. The people of Inogoland and beyond took to the streets in protest, their cries echoing the words of their fallen leader. "Kelechi lives!" they chanted, fists raised in defiance. "Kelechi lives!" But the regime remained unyielding, responding to the protests with more violence. Villages were razed, activists were hunted down, and the military presence in Inogoland was increased. The oil continued to flow, but it was now mixed with the blood of the Inogo people. As the world reacted in horror to the actions of the Beast of Buja, Kelechi's family went into deep mourning. His wife, Adana, sits in their home, surrounded by mourners. She clutches a letter Kelechi had written to her, a final farewell filled with love and hope. Tears stream down her face as she reads his words. "Do not weep for me, Adana. I go to join our ancestors, but my spirit will remain with you and our children. Teach them to love our land, to protect it, and to never stop fighting for what is right." Outside, the sun sets over the polluted rivers of Inogoland, casting a red glow over the land that Kelechi had given his life to protect. The struggle continues, but the loss is profound, and the people are left to carry on the fight without their beloved leader. Everywhere in Inogoland, and indeed all through Muguland itself, there was a sense of profound loss, and a question that hung in the air. How many more must die before justice is served? Who would save Muguland from the bloodthirsty general who would stop at nothing to suppress dissent to his rule? Little did they know that the gods of Muguland have not finished their sport with Muguland. The next thing that happened left everyone speechless. It was a night like any other in the opulent chambers of General Basha-Basha, but the air was thick with tension, anticipation, and something far more sinister. The general had developed a taste for the decadent, and this night he had summoned 3 beautiful women flown in from Lebanon to entertain him in the privacy of his heavily guarded mansion inside Buja citadel. These women were no strangers to the general's demands. They had been selected for their beauty, their skill, and their willingness to participate in whatever dark fantasies the tyrant had conjured. The room was dimly lit, the air filled with the scent of incense and the sound of soft music. The general reclined on a luxurious bed, his uniform discarded, replaced by a loose robe. The women danced before him, their movements slow and sensual, the light reflecting off their oiled skin. They fed him delicacies, fruits, and a particular dish he loved, a spiced delicacy imported from the Middle East and served on exotically prepared apples. The general was especially fond of this delicately prepared apple pie from Lebanon because it gives him an almost superhuman libido, followed by a series of organisms that often lasted through the night while ensconced in the embrace of several foreign women of easy virtues. But what the general didn't know was that this Lebanese apple had been laced with a potent poison, a substance so deadly it would bring even a man of Basha-Basha's notorious strength to his knees. The poison worked quickly, insidiously, slipping into his bloodstream as he watched the women perform unspeakable acts before him. His enjoyment turned to confusion, then to panic, as he felt a burning sensation in his chest, a tightening in his throat. The women continued their dance, pretending to be oblivious to the growing horror in the general's eyes. Basha-Basha tried to rise, but his legs failed him. He clutched his chest, gasping for breath, his vision blurring. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was the smiling face of one of the women, her eyes gleaming with a cold, calculating satisfaction. General Basha-Basha, the man who had ruled Muguland with an iron fist, was dead. His reign of terror, which had claimed so many lives and crushed so many dreams, had come to an abrupt, ignominious end in the very chamber where he had indulged his darkest desires. Immediately, General Basha-Basha stopped breathing. The women jointly carried him into his bathroom and left him in his golden bathtub. They quietly dressed up and came out of his chambers, then told his aides to drive us to the airport as they have always done immediately after an all-night orgy with the Beast of Buja citadel. Without the aides suspecting anything, they were handed bales of dollars, as the general has done in the past, escorted to the same private jet that brought them from Lebanon and were flown back to their country. Immediately they landed, and even before the news of the death of the military ruler was discovered, they had promptly disappeared into the wind. Though the chief security officer of the general, vicious enforcer for the general during his reign of terror, mounted a worldwide hunt for the women with his own resources in the weeks following his death, none of the women have been seen or heard from to this day. The morning after Basha-Basha's death, the people of Muguland awoke to the shocking news. While they slept, the gods finished their sport with the maximum ruler. The announcement was made on the state-run radio, the voice of the announcer trembling as he delivered the news that the country's feared leader had died suddenly in the night. The details were sparse, the cause of death attributed to a sudden heart failure, but rumors spread like wildfire. At a roadside newspaper stand in the bustling heart of LA City, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the sensational headlines. Men and women, old and young, pushed and jostled to get a glimpse of the newspapers that had just arrived, each one trying to make sense of what they were hearing. "Can you believe it?" Bashiru exclaimed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "General Basha-Basha is dead?" Just like that, no way. It must be a trick to find out those who would be happy he's dead. He quickly left the scene in case Basha-Basha's soldiers swooped on the scene to catch them reading the news of their boss's death. "Heart failure, they say," another muttered, shaking his head, "but I don't believe it. That man was too strong to just die like that. Something's not right." An older woman, popularly called Mama Aladura, clutching a bundle of vegetables to her chest, leaned in closer, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. "Maybe it's true," she whispered. "Maybe God finally heard our prayers and struck him down." "But what happens now?" a younger man asked, his voice trembling. "What about the election? What about Chief Abisowo? Will they finally let him go?" The vendor, an old man who had seen his share of leaders rise and fall, shook his head slowly. My friends, this is Muguland. Nothing is ever as it seems. The gods are just beginning their game. The crowd fell silent, each person lost in their own thoughts, their minds racing with the possibilities that Basha-Basha's death could bring. For the first time in years, there was a glimmer of hope, a hope that the dark days of tyranny might finally be over. In London, where the Nakamud fighters had been waging their battle for democracy from exile, the news of Basha-Basha's death was met with a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. For years, Bisola Elenian and his comrades had fought tirelessly to bring an end to the military regime, and now it seemed their greatest enemy was gone. Bisola gathered his closest allies for an emergency meeting in his London safe house. The mood was tense, the air thick with the weight of what had just occurred. "This could be the turning point we've been waiting for," Bisola said. His voice steady but tinged with urgency. "With Basha-Basha gone, there's a chance we can finally secure Chief Abisowo's release and restore democracy." One of the leaders, a seasoned activist named Tunde Alagidi, nodded but frowned. "But who takes over now? And will they be any better? We can't let our guard down." Another ally, Adebayo, urged. "We need to move quickly. We need to put pressure on the new leadership, whoever it is, to release Chief Abisowo and start the transition to democracy." Bisola Elenian nodded. "I'll reach out to our contacts in Muguland. We'll offer whatever support is needed to push this through. The people are ready for change, and we can't let this opportunity slip away." But even as they planned, a sense of foreboding hung over the room. They all knew Muguland too well. The death of one tyrant did not guarantee the birth of freedom. The forces of power in the country were vast, complex, and often ruthless. The road to democracy would still be fraught with danger. As the news of Basha-Basha's death spread, the people of Muguland began to hope. They hoped that the dark days of repression and fear were finally over. They hoped that Chief Abisowo, the rightful winner of the annulled election, would soon be freed from prison and take his place as the leader of the nation. They hoped that democracy would return, and with it a brighter future for their children. But the gods of Muguland, it seemed, were not done with their cruel game of fate. For even as the people dared to dream of freedom, forces were moving in the shadows, forces that would once again test their resolve, their faith, and their endurance. The death of General Basha-Basha was but the opening act in a new chapter of Muguland's turbulent history. The path ahead was still uncertain, and the struggle for the soul of the nation was far from over. The sudden death of General Basha-Basha had left Muguland in turmoil. And into this chaos stepped General Abdul Muhammad, a man known more for his diplomatic acumen than for any appetite for power. Seen by many as a placeholder, Kelechi Abdul Muhammad nevertheless carried the weight of the nation's hopes on his shoulders. He was a man who said the right things, who promised to heal the wounds inflicted by his predecessor, and who committed himself to reversing the wrongs of the past. From his first day in power, General Kelechi Abdul Muhammad made it clear that his tenure would be different. He spoke of unity, of reconciliation, and most importantly, of returning Muguland to civilian rule. "We have suffered long enough," he declared in his first address to the nation. "Our people deserve peace, and our country deserves to be led by the will of its citizens, not the force of arms." But words were not enough, actions were required, and Kelechi Abdul Muhammad knew that the most significant action he could take was to release Chief Abisowo, the presumed winner of the annulled election and the symbol of the democracy movement. The general's decision to release Abisowo was not just a gesture of goodwill. It was a necessary step toward healing a nation scarred by years of oppression. "The time has come," General Kelechi Abdul Muhammad told his advisors in a private meeting. "Chief Abisowo must be freed. His imprisonment is a wound that must be healed if we are to move forward as a nation." The day of Chief Abisowo's release was meant to be a day of triumph, a moment of vindication for all those who had fought and sacrificed for democracy. After years of imprisonment, Abisowo was transferred from his remote prison cell to a government residence in Buja Citadel. Here, in the heart of Muguland's power, he was to meet with the American envoy, a gesture meant to signal Muguland's return to the international community and the dawn of a new era. The meeting was held in a grand yet discreet room with tall windows that allowed the soft light of the late afternoon to filter in, casting a warm glow over the ornate furniture. The American envoy, a seasoned diplomat with a calm demeanor, sat across from Chief Abisowo at a small polished table. Between them was a delicate porcelain tea set adorned with intricate patterns of gold and blue. The servant entered quietly, almost reverently, carrying a fresh pot of tea. He poured the steaming liquid into the cups, his hands steady, his face impassive. Abisowo, weary from years of imprisonment but filled with cautious optimism, reached for his cup, his fingers brushing the cool porcelain. The envoy did the same, and for a moment they sat in silence, the world outside the room forgotten. "This tea is a symbol," the envoy said, lifting his cup slightly in a gesture of camaraderie. "A symbol of new beginnings, Chief Abisowo. A symbol of the peace and progress we all hope to achieve." Abisowo smiled, a weary but genuine smile, and raised his cup to his lips. "To new beginnings," he echoed, the warmth of the tea spreading through him as he took a sip. But as the liquid flowed down his throat, the warmth turned to something else, something wrong. Abisowo's smile faltered. He set the cup down carefully, his hand trembling. A sudden pain shot through his chest, sharp and unrelenting. His vision blurred, and the edges of the room seemed to close in around him. The envoy noticed the change immediately. "Chief Abisowo," he said, concern lacing his voice. "Are you all right?" But Abisowo couldn't answer. The pain was overwhelming now, like a vice tightening around his heart. He clutched his chest, gasping for breath as the realization dawned on him. Something was terribly wrong. The envoy stood up, his chair scraping against the floor as he reached out to steady Abisowo. "Chief, hold on, somebody help!" But it was too late. Abisowo's legs buckled, and he collapsed to the floor, the pain now radiating through every part of his body. His breaths came in short, desperate gasps, his vision narrowing to a pinprick of light. The room around him faded into the background, the voices of those rushing to his aid distant and muffled. As he lay there on the cold marble floor, Abisowo's thoughts turned to his family, to the people of Muguland who had placed their hopes in him, and to the future that was slipping away from him with each agonizing beat of his heart. He tried to speak, to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. In his final moments, Abisowo's eyes met those of the envoy who knelt beside him, his face stricken with helplessness. "Tell them!" Abisowo managed to whisper, his voice barely audible. "Tell them!" I tried. And then with one last shuddering breath, Chief Abisowo, the man who had embodied the dreams of millions, was gone. The teacup, now cold, its contents spilled, lay overturned on the table, a silent witness to the tragedy that had just unfolded. The news of Chief Abisowo's death spread like wildfire across Muguland, plunging the nation into a state of shock and disbelief. For a moment it was as if time stood still, the collective heartbeat of the nation pausing in mourning for a man who had been so close to leading them to a brighter future. At a busy newsstand in Alaye City, a crowd gathered, their faces etched with grief as they read the headlines. The air was thick with sorrow, the weight of the news pressing down on them like a physical force. "How could this happen?" a young man cried out, his voice choked with emotion. "Abisowo is dead! It can't be true!" An older woman, her eyes brimming with tears, shook her head in disbelief. "He was our hope," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They've taken him from us just when we were so close." Another man, a veteran of the democracy movement, clenched his fists, his face contorted with anger and despair. "They killed him," he said, his voice low and bitter. "They couldn't let him live. This country is cursed." The vendor, a man who had seen many leaders rise and fall, looked at the mourners with a heavy heart. "The gods are cruel," he said quietly. "They gave us hope only to take it away, but we must not lose faith. We must keep fighting for Abisowo, for our future." As the nation grieved, the hope that had been rekindled by General Abdul Muhammad's promises began to flicker and fade. The death of Chief Abisowo was not just the loss of a man, it was the loss of a dream that had sustained the people of Muguland through years of suffering. The streets of Muguland were filled with a palpable sense of despair. The people had dared to hope for a better future, but that hope had been cruelly snatched away in the most tragic of circumstances. It was as if the gods themselves were mocking them, playing a cruel game with their lives and their destinies. But even in the depths of their sorrow, there was a flicker of defiance. The people of Muguland had been tested before, and they had survived. They had fought for their freedom, for their rights, and they would continue to fight, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The death of Chief Abisowo was a devastating blow, but it was not the end. The struggle for democracy, for justice, and for the soul of Muguland would go on. And though the road ahead was uncertain, the people knew that they could not give up. For Abisowo, for their children, and for the future of their nation, they would continue to fight, no matter what cruel twists of fate lay ahead. As the sun set over the grieving nation, the people of Muguland prepared themselves for the next chapter in their long, hard-fought struggle. The gods might have had their game, but the people would have the last.
Born in the land of riches, gold, oil, diamond bright. But our streets are stained with blood, where the youth fight for their rights. Protesting for a future, yet they're slaughtered in the night. While the leaders sit in silence, flying private jets in flight. They drive their bulletproof cars while we walk these streets. Say there's no money, but their jets fly with ease. Our children starve, but they're too blind to see. Muguland, why can't we be free?